Hi, I'm Greg Papadopoulos, ALF Class of 22, and welcome to this first video in our series on dialogue, which is part of a bigger ALF effort on continuing education. So dialogue has meant a lot to me in my goings through ALF, and I'd like to share some of that with you. There are really a couple of reasons that I'd encourage you to study dialogue. At a really basic one, it just is a new tool in your toolbox. It gives you a sensitivity to understanding group conversations and maybe helping them and the flow of those things and how you participate in them well. At a more advanced level, when you have others who have also been trained in dialogue, you can take conversations into really magical places, and it can be a super productive and effective tool, especially when dealing with difficult topics. So there are lots of different models of dialogue, but the one that we focused on in ALF, and a particularly powerful one, is David Kanter's 4-player model. And as the name suggests, what Cantor has observed in really productive conversations is that statements that are made, and when people are making those statements, they're doing those from one of 4 positions. He thinks about 2 axes to a conversation. One is the axis of advocacy, and 2 roles that are on the advocacy axis, and an axis of inquiry. Dialogue starts with someone making a move. It's introducing an idea into the conversation. It's a statement of some sort, and it provides direction to the conversation. You can imagine along the advocacy axis someone who disagreed with that or offered some counter point of view. And that's this essential role of opposition inside a dialogue. And so along this axis of move and opposition is a familiar dynamic of a debate. But if you really want to expand the dialogue and make it something that gets deeper into issues and explore them well, then inquiry becomes the essential element. The inquiry has 2 roles in it. One is follow, and if you're a follower, what you're doing is reinforcing something that was moved into the dialogue, or actually can reinforce a criticism. And that adds a connection, a rather completion to the conversation. And the final role is that of bystanding. And that usually is something that helps summarize or bring together a portion or a segment of the dialogue. It comes from a dispassionate position. It's one that is offering a kind of perspective and summarization of what takes place. Welcome back to the ALF series on dialogue, and now we're going to go practice. And I'm joined by Luther and Jenny, senior fellows, and we're going to have a conversation about the Electoral College. So who wants to move?
I think I will. So every election we have the same issues that come up. Let's get rid of the Electoral College, particularly if it's a contentious election, as we've certainly had. My message would be careful what you wish for. That although that there's concern about the background of the Electoral College and how that hurts democracy, actually the presence of the Electoral College means that more people in the country get to vote and participate. Because if you don't have that and you have a popular vote, you have candidates just going to the population centers of the country, which happen to be urban areas. It'd be great for California, great for New York, Florida, Texas, Ohio. But what about Iowa? What about those parts of the country who already feel like they're left out of the national discourse? And you see how they reacted in the last election. So that's my concern.
So the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking, well, what about Iowa? I mean, why not? Why shouldn't the population centers have a larger voice? That's where most of the people are. That's where those voices need to be heard. I get frustrated by the Electoral College and I'm against it because I feel like it's an antiquated system based on racist policies that don't have any play right now in our community. There are lots of ways in which we can create representation for people that allow for those voices to be heard. I live in California and I don't think my vote matters at all in the presidential election, because by the time you get to where we are, it's already done. And if I'm owed one person, one vote, then, and that should matter, why should my vote be seen as less than somebody in an electoral college position that's somehow been deemed more worthy than I to vote for the president? And I'm not sure that that's necessarily true that they are more worthy than I when it comes to voting.
I feel that frustration. There's this kind of conflict between, we say, one person, one vote, and that representation, and that we are a set of states with different voices from a set of geographies. And I get what you're driving at, Luther. This is really a form of participation, maybe, that we're talking about, and what does it mean to participate?
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like there's something important there, as frustrating as it can be in the moment, and that we preserve some sense of this balance between people's voices everywhere and a large number of people.
So I find myself getting frustrated when I hear that, because I think to myself, well, okay, so there's still, though, a belief that people who are in the Electoral College have the ability to make better decisions for the populace than the populace does. And that is inherently against the way I see the role of this country and how our democracy works. And I don't know what our Electoral College looks like. Who do they look like? Do they look like the people in our community? How do they know the voices of our community if they're out there making decisions? Is it still the rich white landowners that sit at the Electoral College level? Or is it really people like you or me, or folks here in San Jose or in San Francisco, or look like people that are actually voting? Representation matters because you should be able to look at a group and see yourself represented. And I don't see that happening.
Well, so just for a moment assume that, take the electors aside and say that they are going to vote exactly along the lines of, the representation,
Sure.
some representatives and senators from that state. And I think that most every state requires the electors to do that.
48 out of the 50 do. Yeah.
Do you still feel that this is misrepresentative?
Yes, because of the way that the Electoral College is populated. It's based on two things: the number of people you have in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And right now, each state gets 2 senators. Doesn't matter how populous your state is. So a state like Iowa that has less people than a state like California, in and of itself inherently has a higher percentage of power through the fact that they get 2 senators for a small amount of people. So while the Electoral College has to follow that for 48 out of the 50 states, we have a larger representation problem that then impacts how we populate the Electoral College.
Doesn't seem fair to you.
No. And fairness and justice is a huge driver for me.
So Jenny, let me try this on you.
Yeah.
So as I hear it, your interest is really representation, that everybody's represented. And given that we all have kind of scarce resources, I'm wondering if we might work together to focus on making sure that everyone can vote and participate in the current system to really fight the voter suppression that we saw in Georgia and a lot of places.
I agree with that, yeah.
As opposed to going after the Electoral College, which I think is a longer term effort. I think we need some reform now.
Cantor's 4-position dialogue is one kind of dialogue technique, and as you get into this a bit, you'll find that there are other forms of inquiry and thinking about conversation that can be extraordinarily helpful. There have been 2 lessons that I've drawn from my work in the area that have been especially important to me. The first, and it really doesn't matter what conversation setting you're in or whether you're following this model or not, is listen to all voices and hear all voices in a conversation. And this is part of your awareness of what's taking place, not just keep track of who's in what state doing what and what's the flow of the conversation, but really keep track of who's not talking. And then how do you bring that person into the conversation? Because you'll find that those people frequently have some point of view that is different than what has been the discourse and offer a really tremendous perspective. A second thing that I've learned, and this has been a really hard one, is listening, but I mean really listening. And that really listening is the mindful way of turning off your inner voice. It's suppressing that urge to, oh, I know the next thing I want to say. I'm going to move here, or I'm going to follow that. Try to put that away and allow the conversation to happen, and trust yourself that at the right point, you can come back to that. You'll remember what you wanted to say. It'll be relevant. Or if someone else has gone and made the point before you, then follow. And that can be a really powerful way to reinforce something that you wanted to be in the conversation. But that's a super hard skill to get, and I wish you luck in all of your dialogic endeavors.